CJ Stroud has officially arrived for the Houston Texans. We talk about that and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On NFL podcast, your daily NFL podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Locked On Ravens. We are free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes over in video form on YouTube. And of course, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Be sure to subscribe in video form on YouTube, follow along in audio form. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We bring you the biggest stories throughout the week across the NFL, and we are here after Week 10's action. Another crazy week, as it always is across the league. We're going to be diving into a bunch of conversation. First, with John Hickman of Locked On Texans. CJ Stroud leads the Houston Texans to another key win last second. We'll talk about that in the first part of the show. Then Alex Clancy of Locked On Cardinals will join us and talk about Kyler Murray's return, James Conner as well. Then I'll move on to Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings as he talks about Josh Dobbs and what his future could be in Minnesota after two big wins. So without any further ado, let's first get into our conversation with John Hickman of Locked On Texans. Well, CJ Stroud had a great performance last week, and he followed up with an even better one against the Cincinnati Bengals, and he leads the Houston Texans to a 30-27 last-second win over that Bengals team. And here to talk about that with me, he's back for second straight week, is John Hickman of Locked On Texans. And John, CJ Stroud is fully here. If he wasn't already, he is fully arrived.
Yes.
He is here. 23-39, 356, one touchdown, one interception. But that does not tell the whole story, in my opinion, on what CJ Stroud was able to do and honestly has been able to do over the course of this season. We've seen stride after stride after stride from him. How did he lead this team to this win over Cincinnati?
Houston just did a very good job of early in the game. You saw the Cincinnati Bengals have difficulty scoring, right? And I think we look at CJ Stroud, we're going to talk about him, of course, but defensively through the first 3.5 quarters, they played phenomenal, right? I think they was doing a good job of confusing Joe Burrow, who was one of, maybe the second or third best quarterback in the NFL. And defensively, they were able to collapse the pocket, and the defensive tackles made it very difficult whenever Joe Burrow wanted to step up to actually go through with those plays. You had Sheldon Rankins, who had a big day. So I think in order for Houston to drop 30, they did a very good job defensively, forcing 3 and outs, allowing their offense the opportunity to get back on the field. And early in that first half, Houston went out there and was able to put points on the board, but also keep that Cincinnati offense, which has been red hot the last 4 games, at bay. I think it was a collective effort. And when you give your offense that type of opportunity, what we've seen from the Houston Texans, when they're not limited with the play calling, and when CJ Stroud is able to kind of take over, they are able to put up points, and that's what happened.
And I know that the big thing was the end of the game drive for CJ Stroud. Cincinnati ties it up on a field goal after Tyler Boyd drops a go-ahead touchdown.
Man, that was crazy.
But
that was crazy.
CJ Stroud comes in, though, and look, he takes this team in 6 plays, 55 yards in 1 minute and 33 seconds. Can you talk about just the ice in his veins that CJ Stroud has? Because he showed that clutch gene on Sunday.
Back-to-back games, too, right? You look at last week, it was 47 seconds left. This week, more time with a timeout. Went down there. Matt Amendola, we got to talk about him, new field goal kicker for the Houston Texans, because Kaimi Fairbairn went out with an injury, was able to march their team down and kick the 3-point. I'm sorry. But I think for CJ, you look at this ice in his veins, it goes back to Ohio State. Like that last game against Georgia, he played lights out. The defense for Ohio State didn't do a very good job of helping him out. That's number one. But he said it at the beginning of the year. He said it during the offseason when the S2 test scorer was a talk of the town. I don't take tests. I play football. He's a footballer. The ice is in his veins, but we got to give credit where credit is due. The wide receivers for Houston, along with Dalton Schultz, played big. 4 catches for 71 yards for Dalton Schultz. The biggest receiver for Houston today, Noah Braun, back-to-back games with 150-yard plus, 172 on 7 catches. They did a very good job of getting open, finding those zones, being able to sit, and then create that opportunity with yards after catch. This was a collective effort. CJ was phenomenal, no doubt about it. But Kevin and listeners, I think what we saw that we may not give a lot of credit to, but we will on Locked On Texans, how dominant this offense can look when the playbook is fully open because the run game was working. Devin Singletary, 30 carries, 150 yards, 5 yards per carry, 1 TD as a team. Houston ran the ball 5.5 yards per carry for 188 yards. The best output of the season. That allowed that offense to kind of dive into their play action a little bit more. You saw a double reverse out there. They got super creative with being able to move the ball. This team was able to operate, I think, for the first time in the identity and the self that Houston wanted to be at the beginning of the year. Running the ball, put the ball in our playmakers' hands, and let's score points. And then defensively, just being able to get after the quarterback early in the game as often as Houston did.
Now, you mentioned Devin Singletary, and that to me is key. They bring him in as a free agent in the offseason from Buffalo. You mentioned his day. It was incredible.
Incredible.
But
career highs, by the way.
Yeah, and I think on the flip side of that, it kind of raises my question of, well, what do the Texans now do with Dameon Pierce, who missed this game, has kind of had a slow year this year. Obviously, it was a rookie sensation for them last season. Right. Do you move to a committee? Is Devin Singletary kind of taken over as the lead back? It was kind of shifting into a committee before Pierce went out. But obviously, Devin Singletary showed that, yeah, he can do some work as the bell cow. So how do you kind of assess Houston's rushing situation right now?
Yeah, Houston has an opportunity to make the playoffs. And in order to do that, you have to put your best players out on the field. Now, Dameon Pierce is out with an injury, but even when he does return, can we definitively say that Dameon Pierce is a better option than Devin Singletary? I'm going to go with no, and I think Houston should continue to ride with Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary and Dameon Pierce are two different running backs, and with the system, the style of offense Houston is trying to run this year compared to last year, Devin Singletary, I believe, is a better option. Devin Singletary does a better job with the limited opportunities and spaces that the offensive line has given him throughout the year, just doing a better job of taking advantage of that. The offensive line hasn't been the best in terms of run blocking, but Devin Singletary is good with a one cut and go to get up. And Dameon Pierce more so initiates the contact, but sometimes it sacrifices a couple of extra yards. And so I think moving forward, Devin Singletary is by far the better option. 30 carries again, 150 yards, his career high. What he was able to do allow Bobby Slowick to get more creative and to get more in his bag. And I don't think Houston should jeopardize that chemistry, that output by bringing in Dameon Pierce and forcing him back into the starting role. I'd also go so far as to say that I think Mike Boone should be more of a priority for the running back group right now than Dameon Pierce. He's coming off that injury. Houston is doing some good things in the absence of Dameon Pierce. You work him back in, but the moment he's healthy, I don't think he should get over 10 carries. I think that's unfair to this offense.
Major shout out to John for his insight. Second straight week John's been on here. Always appreciated. And for more on John's work, check him out over at the Locked On Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Still lots to come on Locked On NFL. We'll be talking about Kyler Murray and James Conner with Alex Clancy of Locked On Cardinals next. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on the show. First, this episode is brought to you by Gametime, and I've had some frustrating ticket buying experiences in my day. Sometimes I wasn't sure if the seats were good. I also couldn't find last-minute deals other times, and sometimes there were just no good deals at all. But you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event because Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And with secure last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And there are a lot of events, me being the host of Locked On Ravens, obviously in the Baltimore area. The Ravens have a big game against the Bengals coming up on Thursday night. So tickets for that, there are concerts, all throughout the app as well in all different areas. And the Gametime app is great because they have last-minute tickets, flash deals, and zone deals, and it's easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. Plus, they have views from all seats in the venue, and they have the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, and more. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps, and they're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. With zone deals, you pick the section and Gametime picks the seats for an average of 18% savings. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spelled LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back. It's our second segment of Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. We just talked with John Hickman of Locked On Texans. Now let's move the conversation to Alex Clancy of Locked On Cardinals. Kyler Murray comes back. James Conner comes back. And the Cardinals pick up a win. We'll talk about what Alex saw now. Arizona Cardinals fans have been waiting for this for a long time. Kyler Murray returns to the field alongside James Conner, a couple of key offensive weapons back for Arizona, and they win the game against the Falcons 25-23. Here to break that down with me is Alex Clancy, the host of Locked On Cardinals. And Alex, I know it's been almost a year now, a long year for Cardinals fans. Kyler Murray gets injured in December, comes back now just about a year, a little less than a year, completes 19 to 32 passes, 249 yards, does have the interception, but contributes 6 carries for 33 yards and a touchdown on the ground. How do you think Kyler looked in his first game back?
Better than expected. He had an errant throw that ended up being an interception. It was more of a timing thing. He wanted Trey McBride, I think, to sit down in between the linebacker and the corner. Trey McBride continued, ended up in an interception. There was a false start on Kyler Murray, which is rare for a quarterback to have a false start, but he flinched it. There were some rust. It's a new offense. He hadn't played in 11 months to the day. But 2 minutes left, down 1, Kyler Murray comes down, leads the team on a game-winning drive, and not bad for a guy that hasn't played in almost a year.
Yeah, it was a long time coming for Kyler Murray. Obviously worked very hard to get back to this point, but what do you expect moving forward from him? As he kind of ramps up over the next month, maybe rest of the season? I know there are questions surrounding his future in Arizona, but what are you expecting for this year? Kyler Murray is going to be the conductor of find out where the talent is on this offense for the future. And I've kind of taken a different approach towards watching the Cardinals in 2023 because win-loss is not going to be the barometer for growth and success. They did get a win today, moving to 2-8. It's going to be, is Hollywood Brown a wide receiver 1, somebody in your backyard? Is Michael Wilson, rookie out of Stanford, 3rd-round pick, going to be a wide receiver 2? Are they going to retain Rondale Moore? What is James Conner going to be? Do they need to bring in a young back to kind of carry the load at this point? And is Kyler Murray going to be able to make a lesser than talent-wise offensive line look better than they are? And that's really what it's going to be. And then is Trey McBride going to be the next great young tight end in this league? He's the first tight end in the Arizona Cardinals in the last 34 years to have over 100 receiving yards today on myriad catches. So it's Kyler Murray is going to be like the litmus test by proxy for what the rest of this offense is going to look like moving forward. And I know that for Arizona, you're right. Wins and losses, I don't think are the key to this season anymore. Just looking for guys who can contribute in the future. But I know you mentioned James Conner. He is a veteran that they have had to maneuver things with him out. They've had a couple of young backs try that. He came back with Kyler in this game. Kyler wasn't the only guy who came back. James Conner, 16 for 73 on the ground, 4.6 yards per carry. He's solid, but are you kind of maybe ushering in a new running back as the year ends, or do you kind of look for James Conner to be this guy who can stick around for a couple more years?
Yeah, it's a good question. The Arizona Cardinals, and Kevin, you and I have talked about this for a while, the Arizona Cardinals haven't had very many quote-unquote Arizona Cardinals on their roster. They've been a transplant team talent-wise. The draft has kind of been infused with ineptitude from the former GM Steve Keim. But James Conner came in on a 1-year prove-it deal a couple of years ago, and all he's done is produce. Now, to answer your question directly, James Conner, in my humblest of opinion, for the next handful of years, because you want him to stay with the organization, is to move into that more of a LeGarrette Blount role, where you have a young back who's going to carry most of the load, but on short yardage, inside the 10 and during important downs throughout a game, you bring in James Conner to touch the ball 10, 12 times. He shouldn't be touching the ball more than 15 times a game for the rest of the year. It's not something you want to have him withstand the test of time. He's not going to get any younger, but you have a guy who has the skill set like he does. He's got a great nose for the end zone, which many running backs just don't have. And I think moving forward, they need to find a way to kind of wedge out a part of the offense for him in perpetuity and kind of build around him in the running back room, not counting Kyler Murray's usage of his legs.
And you mentioned finding the talent on offense, so I think they've definitely found something in Trey McBride, who comes into this game after Zach Ertz goes on IR a couple weeks ago. Trey McBride stepped up, and in this game, certainly 8 for 131 through the air for him. He had 9 targets, and it seems like Kyler Murray definitely looked his way in this one. What have you seen from him, and do you feel like Trey McBride has a ceiling of maybe a top 10 or maybe top 5 tight end in this league?
I think it's higher than that. He was drafted as the top tight end in the 2022 draft, or the 2021 draft, sorry. And no, 2022 draft, sorry. He was a rookie last year. And, Steve Keim could have gone offensive lineman, could have gone edge rusher, but he decided to not do that and decided to draft a tight end instead, which made no rational sense for anybody in the Valley. But that is the last gift that Steve Keim left the Arizona Cardinals, because Trey McBride's comp coming out of Colorado State was George Kittle. Great blocking tight end, could run over linebackers, could run over corners, can run over safeties, and he's great in space and he catches everything. Mark my words, on Monday, November 13th, when this airs, he will be one of the next great top 3 crops. When Mark Andrews and George Kittle and Travis Kelce moves on, Trey McBride will be the tight end you want to have in fantasy football and on the field, and the Cardinals are lucky to have snagged him in the second round a couple years ago.
Might have to clip that one. That's a bold one. I'm liking it, Alex. But you mentioned what you want to see from Arizona's offense for the rest of the season. What about defensively? There's still talent on that unit for sure. Again, wins and losses don't define this year for Arizona, but what would you like to see out of that group?
Even more so than what I just spoke about the offense, they need to find their stars. They need to find the players that are going to have that trajectory of stardom. Now, Monty Osborne drafted Garrett Williams, 3rd-round pick out of Syracuse, was a fringe first-round pick, but tore his ACL in his last year at college. BJ Ojulari was hurt to start the season, had 2 sacks today, coming off the edge out of LSU. Those 2 guys are really the ones, because the Cardinals need help in the pass rush. They need help drastically in the cornerback room. We're going to see out of those guys if they're going to be able to save the Cardinals' high draft capital in the 2024 draft and beyond. It's going to be a diagnosing of the talent that the Cardinals do have on defense. They've got Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson over the top, who are the metronome of this defense. Kazir White in the middle, coming over from Philly, who knows Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rallis' scheme. And it's going to be a determination on what they do with Zayvon Collins and other guys who've been on the roster who really haven't made waves, the young guys already starting to do. And it's really just going to be kind of a wait-and-see approach, and who is going to be a part of this team for the future, because Monty Osborne, new GM, is obviously not against moving off of players who he doesn't see as part of the future scheme for this team.
And speaking of future, obviously the Cardinals bring in Jonathan Gannon to hopefully be the head coach of the future for this team. How would you assess his performance through 10 weeks?
The only real knock is they have massive penalty numbers. Massive. It was 10 for 110 today. And I'm giving him a pass this year. This is the proof of concept year for the Cardinals. And he's really instilled his vision and his goals, his family camaraderie thing that he put in. And it's shown in spades. I mean, it's shown, across the landscape of the state of Arizona. The penalties, I'm giving him a pass, because usually lesser than NFL or fringe NFL talent has a tendency, especially on defense, to hold more pass interference, more jumps at the line for neutral zone infractions, because they're not NFL talent. And sure, it needs to get cut down upon, but that's the big knock. Other than that, he's ushered in a new wave in Arizona. And it's not just because it's not Cliff Kingsbury now. It's because it's Jonathan Gannon and Monty Osborne. And that is a massive shift in a team that has been a perennial loser since its inception.
Alex with the great Cardinals insight. Be sure to check out his work over at the Locked On Cardinals podcast and right here on Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Still a ton to get to on Locked On NFL. Coming up, we'll be talking about Josh Dobbs of the Minnesota Vikings with Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings. Don't go anywhere, still a lot to get to. First, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. There's $150 if your team wins. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options. The app is great. Again, includes spreads, player props, over-unders, and more for the Ravens. Of course, personally being the host of Locked On Ravens. Wasn't a great game for Baltimore. They lose 33-31, but hey, plus 30 for both teams over there. Plus, if you picked a Keaton Mitchell touchdown, you're probably living large, and it wasn't the best day for Lamar Jackson, but the Ravens and Bengals Thursday night game should have plenty of great props over on FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. We return our final segment of Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here again. Thank you so much for tuning in today, making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day. Be sure to subscribe, video form, audio form, 5-day-a-week NFL content here on this show. Let's talk with Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings now. The Vikings trade for Josh Dobbs after Kirk Cousins goes down, and he's led him to a 2-0 record with a win over the Saints on Sunday. The recent one, we'll talk about that with Luke now. Well, the Minnesota Vikings might have found the new future of their franchise in Josh Dobbs. Here to talk about that with me, Luke Braun, the host of Locked On Vikings. And Luke, I don't know what your expectations were for Josh Dobbs coming in after the trade, but I think for everybody, he's at least blown the expectations away, considering he still doesn't really know the names or the organization. Came in a couple weeks ago and has gone 2-0, defeating the New Orleans Saints here in Week 10, 27-19, throws for 268 yards and a touchdown. I mean, what were your expectations coming into this after the Kirk Cousins injury, and what has Josh Dobbs done to those expectations?
I think everybody in Minnesota would have been happy if it just looked sensible, just looked reasonable. I don't think anybody like Cousins is down, Jefferson's out. Well, let's just kind of limp through the rest of this season and keep our dignity. But after what happened in the Falcons game and you saw a little juice and you go, well, what if he has that juice next week? And what if he learns the playbook, right? And that's kind of what we saw against the Saints in that first half, where the Vikings went up 24-3 at halftime. And then the game was just sort of a maintenance issue from there. It was actually, progressions and throwing accurate balls with anticipation, good footwork and all that. Not only better than what you'd expect for a guy that's still only been it's only been 12 days. Like, it still hasn't been that long. But also a guy that looks better than he looked in Arizona in terms he's playing with quieter feet. Like they've instilled better habits in him too. So I don't know, something's cooking in Minnesota. It's pretty cool.
And I know that there's been a lot of conversation about just where the Vikings would go with Kirk being down for the season. Now, they still have a young quarterback there in Jaren Hall, who obviously Dobbs has been playing over right now. Is there any quarterback controversy to you right now in Minnesota, or is this Josh Dobbs' team until further notice?
I think it's still a week-to-week thing, and Dobbs has bought himself another week. I think that's the way, like, every time he has a good game, okay, you get to keep having it. But the Vikings really like Jaren Hall, and this is not like a you're on a thin ice, mister kind of deal. It's that they've got another guy that they're pretty excited about too. So I think it's a deal that just keeps, like, moving itself through week to week. And then in terms of what happens in the future, your guess is as good as mine. Let's roll the dice and see who's right. I mean, there is a world where they bring back Kirk Cousins coming off that Achilles injury. He's probably going to have to accept that no matter where he signs, it'll be for less money than he wanted, less guarantees than he wanted. Once he has accepted that was kind of the Vikings hang up in the first place. So that conversation might change. Maybe they go with Jaren Hall and Josh Dobbs in a draft pick and just say, let's see what rises. Maybe they do something else completely insane that we're not talking about at all. I have genuinely no idea where that heads after the season.
And this is a 6-4 football team now. I mean, I know there were questions about just what the Vikings would do. We talked about it a couple weeks ago, where they would be and what they would do with Cousins going down. I mean, obviously this team is not punting. That was never their intention, especially at the trade deadline when, they really only trade away as for Cleveland. But where do you kind of see this team going? Because the NFC, there's an opening there for the Vikings to potentially make some noise.
They're 7th right now. If the playoffs started today, they're traveling to Ford Field. And it's been that way for a few weeks now, actually. I think when they were 1-4 and Justin Jefferson was going on IR and the fans kind of felt like the sky was falling, but Kevin O'Connell actually answered that exact question in the press conference and said, nobody here ever thought the sky was falling. We thought, look, we know we're a better team than our record says, and we just have to go prove it and silence some haters. And I think once they put down the game they did against San Francisco on Monday Night Football a few weeks ago, they kind of all started to drink the Kool-Aid a little bit. And even without Kirk Cousins, then they come out against Atlanta and they win. And now this game, they're all 100% bought in. This team is going to keep fighting like hell in games until the NFL no longer lets them play games. Whether the standings allow them to play in the postseason or not, there's a lot of variables there. I won't pretend to make any predictions, but everybody's all in. Everybody is bought absolutely 100% in. Yeah, they traded Ezra Cleveland away. That was more of a factor of Dalton Reisner than, a factor of the standings. They're not going to overreact to singular moments and what the playoff probability machine says. They did that because they felt like they had depth and they could eke a little bit of value out of that. But they're in.
And to me, I think that this is a huge stretch coming up because you have Denver, Chicago, and Las Vegas back to back before you have a bit of a tough stretch with the Bengals, Lions, Packers, and Lions. What's kind of your outlook on the rest of the regular season based off what their schedule is?
The way I look at it is one at a time. So, okay, now we just start thinking about the Broncos. Bears and Raiders can be for Bears and Raiders week. They got a buy in there too. That's big. But now we're on Justin Jefferson watch. He's eligible to come back from IR. He could have come back for this game, but they're being cautious essentially. And they said that it would have been a pretty aggressive move to bring him back for this game, which implies that it was possible, but just not wise. So they're in that world now. He's in his 21-day window. So he either comes back for the next game or the game after that. He technically could stay out all the way until the bye, and then he would come back against the Raiders. But we're sort of watching that day to day now.
And do you feel like that would be a ramp-up process regardless of how long they hold him out, the snap count situation, just so they can be extra sure even when he comes back?
I don't think they'll do it that way. I think that they'll make him 110% and then he'll be good to go. I don't think they'll do the snap count, the pitch count thing where, you're still risking re-aggravation a little bit, but mitigating that risk. No, Jefferson went in front of the media this week and said, when I'm 110%, I'll play. And that's the message the Vikings have given him. It's the message the Vikings have put out there, and it's the message that he's repeating as well. So when he's 110%, he'll go. But I think he's getting there.
And what do you think of the ascension of Jordan Addison in Jefferson's absence? He's obviously had to step up. KJ Osborne obviously making some plays as well. Right. They needed those guys to step up or they wouldn't be in this situation right now. So what does adding Jefferson back to that mix do for them?
Yeah, and Osborne is another one that he went out last week with a concussion. He's another one that could have played, but after a nasty looking concussion against the Falcons, you kind of say, yeah, maybe not. But let's just chill on that. So you get guys like Jalen Naylor, who just came off of IR, his second year day 3 pick. Guys like Brandon Powell, who they got very cheap in free agency, stepping up. As well as, this particular game was like the TJ Hawkinson explosion game, buck 34, 11 catches and a touchdown. Absolutely dominant TJ Hawkinson performance, not to say anything about what he did blocking and in the run game. And he was on a snap count because he's dealing with a rib injury. So Vikings are banged up everywhere. So it's nice to see that depth. But once you get that full strength complement back, I'll be curious to see how it folds in. I think the Vikings were a little bit of the Andre Johnson effect is what I call it, where you have one guy that you rely on so much and it warps your offense so much that it sort of becomes how defenses approach you. And I think they kind of get themselves into trouble that way by overly relying on one player as good as he is. So kind of being forced to say, we can run an offense through Jordan Addison. If they want to double JJ, we can do this for Addison. We can do this with TJ Hawkinson. I think this is healthy for them to know that option is available. Not that Justin Jefferson deserves fewer targets or whatever it is, but just flexibility is always good.
Major shout out to Luke. Check out Luke's work over the Locked On Vikings podcast and right here on Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On NFL. Thank you so much for tuning in. Coming up tomorrow, I'll be right back here with your Tuesday host. So be sure to stay tuned for that. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On NFL.